Hello everyone. First of all, can you hear us okay? If you can't, please send a question or raise your hand. And you can do that throughout the presentation as well, and I will try to help Kim and Jillian answer your questions. I can either unmute you if you raise your hand, or you can type in a question in the question box, and we will do our best to address your questions as we go along.
Great. Okay. Today's session is towards Aboriginal children and families thriving, accessing data and training. And we'll go through 5 key themes or points. Aboriginal Community Liaison Coordinator role, which is my role. Some background information on the Aboriginal Steering Committee, which guides the core project work here at HELP. Aboriginal children and the EDI, the Early Development Instrument, and how to access the Aboriginal children's data, and using the data as a catalyst for action, for making meaning of the information in your own communities.
Thanks so much for joining us today to talk about this. It's our first Aboriginal webinar that we've done with Kim since she started here earlier this year. We always like to take this opportunity when we're speaking to a group about some of the work we do at HELP, particularly this interesting Aboriginal work, just to recognize Clyde Hertzman and the vision that he provided for HELP, and just the insight that he brought into this work, and it's really a privilege to be able to carry it on for him. A lot of you know me, a lot of you have worked with us for many years, and in the spirit of working on this new file and joining Kim working on Aboriginal work at HELP, I thought I would just put some pictures of myself up so that you can see me in another context. And there are some pictures of me here from the early years of my little boy's life. That's Alexander, my son. He's 10 now. And some of the pictures of us in our early years in Nunavut, out on the sea ice and on Baffin Island, and then some of the newer pictures. What's really nice for me is that I've been working at HELP now. I'm going into my 7th year. But when I started here, Alexander was just still in preschool, but going into school. And when I started working on the EDI, he was an EDI kid. And his teacher filled in a survey on him. And then right as I started working on the MDI, Alexander's teacher brought the MDI into their classroom and he filled it in. So I feel like I'm moving right along here on some kind of a timeline.
And that's a picture of me. In the center is about 2 years ago when I was at Slave Lake, and I just graduated from Athabasca University with a master's degree in cultural studies. So my sister and I drove further up north because that's where my First Nations roots trace to, the Cree and Slave Lake. And then on the right-hand side, I'm drumming in Abbotsford in about the year 2005. So my father is German, and my mother's roots trace again to Slave Lake, and the Métis roots to St. Boniface in Manitoba.
Guys, thanks very much. We're having some technical difficulties. We're just organizing our screen, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. It's such a nice thing that I've noticed in working with Aboriginal communities and groups over the past few years here at HELP is how people introduce themselves and really ground sort of where they're from and where they've spent time and a little bit of information about their families. So we just wanted to start with that. And we're just adjusting the screen, so we'll be back with you in just a moment. Thanks for waiting. Thanks for your patience. While we're waiting, I'm just going to tell you about a recent meeting we had. After the expo, we had our huge expo last week on Wednesday. And then on Thursday and Friday, we had our Provincial Aboriginal Steering Committee come in and meet. And they had the opportunity to go to the expo and get refreshed on all the good work that HELP is doing, and then stick around for 2 more days to work in a really concentrated way with us. And it was just a fabulous experience as always. We only get to meet with them twice a year. And I think Joseph Dunn, I think you're in the group listening. And meeting with you was a highlight for the group. I just wanted to reflect that back to you and say we're looking forward to working with you a little more closely in the future with that group. And we're just trying to get our slides back up for everybody to see. And I'm wondering if we need to get a new computer at this point. And I think we're back. Thank you, everyone. Oh. Feels like a Monday. Okay, Kim, do you want to pick up?
Here we are. Back to 1983 when I started out my career as a preschool teacher working at a nursery school in White Rock, and it's astonishing to me to look at this picture today because I know many of these 3- and 4-year-olds have their own families. And after I left preschool and daycare, I worked as a social worker for a number of years. I went back to school and completed a degree in developmental psychology, and I worked in the nonprofit sector for a while. And last year I worked for BC Society of Transition Houses doing a project coordination role, and I joined HELP in February this year. And here's our core message, that the early experiences matter and they impact us throughout our lives. And so we know that a lot of you are doing this work out there, and it's making a difference. The goals and dreams of our young Aboriginal people are coming true. In 2006, on-reserve First Nation graduation rates were around 40% in British Columbia, and more recently they're up to 46%.
So this is really just another way of saying what Kim was just saying. And this slide was actually created by Clyde Hertzman to use with the wider population. We used it all across the province. And it's really just pointing out the different challenges and things that people can face in different decades of their lives. And his point really with this slide was that early experiences matter the most. And what happens in your early years, and when we talk about that in the case of EDI, we're really talking about the first 5 years of life, really stay with you for the rest of your life. So as you know, at HELP, we are monitoring the state of human development, child development, human development, and we're looking at it at the level of the population. We now have collected 5 waves of EDI data across the province, and we've been doing it since 1999. And so what we have is a really good data set where we have gone out and collected EDIs from schools and communities across British Columbia 5 times. And that means that we can start looking at trends. Because of Clyde's leadership, really HELP was the first organization, the first jurisdiction in the world to do this kind of population level monitoring on child's development.
So Aboriginal engagement means a few things here. It means checking in with the ASC, our Aboriginal Steering Committee. It means that we are also going out and working with the communities, finding out information from them. And here's some of the partnerships with communities that we're developing with schools, so both public schools and First Nation schools, through Aboriginal Education Councils, both those that are already formed and those that are working on forming their councils. Aboriginal early childhood programs, including infant development programs. And governance, so chief and council sometimes will request the EDI data. And of course the parents, the caregivers, the grandparents, aunties and uncles that attend all the meetings and community engagement projects we're involved with. And so that's really the scope of my role, building the community relationships, strengthening the existing relationships, and my core work, supporting the Aboriginal Steering Committee to make sure all our projects are culturally sensitive and relevant to the Aboriginal communities. Here's some of the interests of the Aboriginal Steering Committee. Our core research, the EDI and the MDI instruments. So within the instruments, as well as the administration of the instruments and sharing the information, the cultural safety, identity and traditional language, and Jillian will go through a bit more of that later in the presentation. Knowledge translation, which really means communication, so we develop resources including a template for school district reports, sharing the information, a resource document that shows the flow chart of how the data is shared, as well as our training for teachers, which include videos that the Aboriginal Steering Committee members were involved in the production in the actual video. Here are the current 9 members. So there's 2 elders, including Jesse Nyberg from the Shuswap region, Andy Yellowback, who's a Cree elder, and 7 other representatives, as well as 2 new members that are just coming on board. And they represent all nations from around BC and beyond. And they all have different backgrounds, including children, family health, infant development. As well, we have a teacher, a graduate student here at UBC. A few things to say about the EDI Aboriginal child data. So all children, Aboriginal children who attend public schools that are participating will be included in that information. And some First Nation schools have participated in the EDI once or twice, and some have participated each year that we've done the questionnaire.
This is somewhere I just wanted to pause for a minute and just add in, because I'm working on the implementation side, the data collection side, is we're really trying to make sure that any schools that want to be included are included. And it's been an interesting time trying to get people on board, and I think that part of it is making sure that people understand, that schools understand, and nations understand what it is that we're doing here with the data and the value of it. And that's going to be a big part of Kim's role. We know that when we are collecting Aboriginal or just EDI data, and certainly with Aboriginal kids, that teacher training is key, because the EDIs are filled in by teachers. And we've spent a lot of time over the past little while trying to refine our training and to make sure that we're properly capturing information on Aboriginal kids. The next phase of our training network involves adding in Aboriginal trainers. So what we have right now on the teams in each school district is we have a district trainer, and a lot of you are on the line with us today. We have community folks. Again, I see some of you on there too. And when it comes to EDI training, we sometimes bring in kindergarten teachers when it comes down to talking about the nuts and bolts of how to fill in the survey. And we're asking our training teams to consider bringing in an Aboriginal trainer to join the team too, to speak to the points about filling in the survey that relate specifically to Aboriginal children. So this will be familiar to some of you. This is a paper copy of the EDI, the front page of it, which we call the demographics section. And if you see down where the red line is on question 11A and 11B, we have been doing a lot of work with this area of this survey over the past few years in trying to capture data on Aboriginal children that is representative of them. We used to just include them on question 12 in child's first language and try to figure out how can we capture Aboriginal children's identity when they might not actually speak the language but still identify with that language group. In the last few years, we were successful in working with the Offord Center at McMaster, who actually has the copyright for the survey, to add a more specific question down there. So where you see question 11A, Aboriginal, and then 11B is the fairly new question. which Aboriginal language group does the student identify with. And this has really changed things for us here. I'm going to show you what I mean. First of all, though, in the teacher guide, this is what teachers see when they go in to get more information on how to fill in those questions 11A and 11B. I'm just going to draw your eyes down to the bottom of this slide where we say it's really about, this question is asking which Aboriginal peoples the student identifies with through their language groups. The student does not have to speak or understand the language to identify with that group. That's such an important concept, and we spend a lot of time in our teacher training trying to get that across to teachers. And there's been a real uptake here. And these are the language codes that we provide for teachers so that they can choose if they understand where their students in their class are from, what group that they would identify with. They can choose one of these languages. If they're unsure or they think it's something different than this, they can just type it in. And then each year, what we do is Kim will get a list of all the languages that didn't quite fit into these codes. And so each year we're refreshing this list and adding languages to it. And you'll notice there are languages here that go way beyond the bounds of what we have in British Columbia, because the truth is we have children from nations across Canada and even some from the States. And so we just try to make sure that we've got a breadth of languages here so that teachers can see how they can fill it in for the kids who are actually in their class. So this is the exciting part where we get to see the fruits of our labor. All of those discussions and negotiations with the Offord Center, and we also had some support this year from the First Nations Education Steering Committee and how to ask some of these questions. And all of that work and training videos and working with the trainers and the training teams, we've seen a real increase over the years in teachers' rate of recognition of the Aboriginal language groups that their students identify with. So starting in 2008-09, which is when I started here, it was around 4%. And I remember Clyde kind of jumping up and saying, why is this so low? Because if these kids were English as a second language, the teachers would know what language they spoke. And that really kind of, we started embarking on a whole new path at that point. And then you can see the rate go up. And those little incremental increases that gradually to 2012-13 skyrocket up to 68.9%. It's really to do with our training and with the commitment of the teachers to trying to figure this out, to working with families and their kids in their classrooms to figure out, make sure that they know a little bit more about the children in their classroom and their Aboriginal heritage, and trying to fill it in properly on the EDI. We don't have more recent data on this slide just because we're midway through wave 6 right now, but we have already in the first year of data collection seen another increase. So we feel like we're going in the right direction with this work. This map is on our website. We've got some really good web pages developed around the Aboriginal work that we do at HELP. And I really need to recognize Michelle Sam, who was a senior Aboriginal researcher at the time when I first started at HELP and has just gone on to do her PhD and is a student now, but continuing her research. And it really was her vision to figure out how can we show British Columbia in a little bit of a different way. So we always talk about our research in terms of where the kids live, and we group them according to school district. And Michelle, rightly so, really wanted to see children grouped according to traditional language boundaries. And it's so interesting, if we look at Michelle's home territory of Tanaha on the lower right of the slide, you can see how many school districts that overlaps. And so when we're talking about kids in School District 5, and we're talking about Tanaha kids, we know we're not talking about all of them, that they go across that 3 or even 4 school districts. So this is an ongoing research. We still get a lot of input from people around, I think that the lake, you know, in my territory is more inside my boundary and not inside the other one. And so this is an ongoing discussion with our Aboriginal Steering Committee, and we're certainly open to anyone in communities who wants to call Kim and have a discussion about it, and we're happy to. We see these more as living boundaries, I think. They never were really firm boundaries, were they?
Right, no. And one thing that is not lost on us as well is that we know that children are from different territories, maybe even the United States or other provinces, and so when we're reporting back to communities, we're including those children who are from outside these boundaries so that the school districts will have an idea of how to deal their resources. For example, you might have a lot of Michif kids, even though it's not a Michif territory. So I just want to say a few things about how to access the Aboriginal children's data and our principles of data collection that we're following to respect Aboriginal nations and communities. The data is not shared publicly for Aboriginal children, although the mainstream, the general information is. This is to protect the children from cultural safety. The EBI data is intended to identify population-based patterns, trends, and influences on child development. It's not meant to identify individual children or small groups of children. We're not interested in the practice of comparing data between groups of children because it may not produce accurate findings and it may perpetuate stereotypes. And our research is guided by privacy and ethics standards through UBC and also through the principles of OCAP, ownership, control, and access. And this is something that was formed from the National Aboriginal Health Organization, the First Nations Governance Committee, and this speaks to the principles that we follow, that First Nations and Aboriginal communities own the information that is collected about them, that they are involved in accessing the information and how that information is accessed, and the control of that information, how it's shared, and possession, which differs slightly from control and access in that here at UBC we're the stewards of the information. Like the information is housed in a safe place here, but we still believe that First Nations communities are owners of that data. And that's why we're following this data sharing process. So after the surveys are completed, we create the reports. The knowledge translation team works on creating those reports and the visuals for those reports. The general reports are made public, and then requests for the Aboriginal-specific data come from the Aboriginal Education Councils or committees, or the First Nation Chief and Councils, they come to me. And that information, again, isn't shared publicly. And once those reports for Aboriginal children are completed here from our teams, we're happy to report them back and hopefully be invited to the communities and school districts to help you make meaning of the reports. And it's not just numbers for communities. And we're excited that this year we have a new report template which will include all of the language information. And as you'll see in this word graph, sometimes we get reports back Inuit, which is not a language, but this is reported from children to teachers or children's families to teachers. So we're collecting all of this. We're not translating this information into something that's correct.
So I love this, and my understanding of this, Kim, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the size of the language of the word represents what we're finding in our data.
That's true.
And I think this was created for all of the Aboriginal data we have so far. So over the past 5 waves of data collection, you can see Coast Salish obviously really stands out, and that's one of the main ones.
So again, once we have these reports ready in the fall, we want to bring them out to you following requests so that you can have them as a catalyst for action. That the EDI is not the whole picture, it's part of the picture of understanding the data in your community. So that the information can be used as a community engagement tool as you bring moms and dads and policymakers, decision makers, resource people to your meetings to decide how you're going to direct resources and policy for better ECE and ECD programs in your communities. Again, the EDI results are just one part of the child development picture. It's not the full picture. Questions, comments?
We'd love to hear from you.
Stories?
I see some names on the list who are in conversation with us currently, trying to get access to data, and so it's great to see you here. I also see names on the list of people who have been part of a group that did access data, and please put your hand up if you'd like to share with the group, or if anyone has questions about what we've presented here. This is a really exciting thing for us to be able to get this data out into the hands of communities, and we're working hard on it, and we'd love to talk about it with you. So we're just going to take a moment and give you a chance to respond in case anyone has any questions, and we'll just wait a few minutes. Now, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if there is somebody who would like to raise your hand, we could unmute you and you could talk about your experience with Aboriginal data. That might be great for the group to hear. I think we have a question.
Is our website?
Thanks for that question, Carmen. And we have several maps on the website, and you'll see all of the work that's being done with the language maps. Thank you for that. So we have a question here asking, could we have and share the language slide where the number of reporting identifying with the language is reflected by the size of the font? That's that cool thing that Jeremy produced. Maybe we can go back to that just for a moment. I think this is going to be part of our new Aboriginal EDI report package. We're just pulling that together. So Denise, send me a note after, Cecilian or Kim, a note, and to ask about that, and I'll see where we are with this. I think we're still finalizing it. It's just brand new.
Yeah.
Be happy to share it, though, when it's finalized for sure. Great. I think we've got another question here. Just a comment. I wonder if I could just read that for just for a minute. Great. So we've got some people asking for more information on the language maps, and we'd love to hear from you. Please just pick up the phone and give Kim a call, and she'll be happy to talk you through the website and show you where to find things. And this is Kim's contact information. I think we've got another question in there. One question I have, let's see here. Yeah, we've got a few, so maybe we can just maximize them. Okay. All right, so we have a follow-up question. I'm just going to read it out first. One question I have is if your parameters are to do with socioeconomic status, or also considering other factors like cultural literacy or emotional literacy. So, Carmen, if I understand your question, I think, are you asking, it might be good if you have a microphone to raise your hand and we could unmute you and we could bring you right into this conversation. But if I understand your question, I think you're asking about what information we're reporting out on with this Aboriginal EDI data. And it's just the information that we're capturing on the EDI itself. So if you haven't taken a look at the EDI survey in a long time, there's a copy of it on our website, and we can show you in a moment where to find that. And there are social emotional questions on there, absolutely a big section. Socioeconomic status. So Barry Forer here at HELP has done a lot of work in taking a look at general EDI results and how they map onto census variables like socioeconomic status. And if you could send me a note, I can certainly put you onto some of that research. He gave a talk at the HELP Expo on a slightly different topic, but this is his area of expertise. And I'm just coming down to the next question here. Do you want to read that one up, Joseph's question?
There's a question about, in some communities, Aboriginal early years councils are not connected to Aboriginal education councils or nearby bands. Are there any alternatives possible for the Aboriginal early years councils for accessing the Aboriginal EDI data? Or can a role be played by HELP in bridging that connection? One thing we've been doing to help a few communities is to come out to the schools to help them understand the importance of forming the Aboriginal Aboriginal education councils, and often they're inviting the early years ECD workers from the community to those tables as well, connecting those bridges that way. But other than that, there's no other way at this point to access the data.
But we're happy to work with you. If there's some way that we can advocate for that. I know, just switching gears for a moment, but with the MDI project, we spend a lot of time trying to help communities and schools come together around the data. And so in the case of this accessing Aboriginal data, we're very happy to try to bring groups together.
There's another question about the Aboriginal word slide. That isn't available on the website right now. That will be coming out in our template reports for school districts for Aboriginal children. Right now it's just the language-based groups on the land-based maps that are on there currently.
It's all coming though. We've had some amazing amount of work been done by our knowledge translation team, particularly Jeremy Alexander, over the past 6 months on this. And so that will be up on our website fairly soon. So Carmen, I see a follow-up question there from you. You recently went to a HELP Expo in Vancouver. Socioeconomic status was presented, not other parameters. So I can answer you in terms of general EDI data. Barry Forer has done a pile of work considering many, many different components of from the census. So there would be a lot in there to look at, the work that he's done. I'd be happy to connect you to him. We haven't done that work with the Aboriginal EDI data specifically. We're just in the early stages here of trying to get the data organized in a framework that will be understandable and useful to communities. And we're just in those early stages of trying to make sure that the data goes out and we've got the basic stats are right and that communities know how to use it and that we have the capacity to support them to use it. So it's early days, but I can certainly see that happening. And again, all of those areas of inquiry, anything to do with Aboriginal data, is really led by the interest and commitment and priority setting that's done by our Aboriginal Steering Committee. And I think we've pretty much covered it. Terrific questions, everyone. Thank you everybody for coming and for the great questions and discussion at the end. If there's any other follow-up questions or any other areas of interest, please do connect with Kim. I'm just going to go back to her connection there, her email and her telephone number.
Yeah, and if you don't have a pen in front of you, you can always check our website, and I'm on the website. You can reach me through there.